So, I'm Randy Huett, and I'm the pastor of Life Community Church, and I have been for almost 43 years. In 1981, Tina and I were pastoring at a church in Spring Hill, Louisiana, and we had been there a couple of years, and we loved it. It was a tremendous opportunity, and I was only 23 years old when I went there, and I didn't have any idea what I was doing, but I was young and foolish and didn't know what I didn't know. And we had a great time there. The people were loving and caring. They took care of us like grandparents and parents. They treated us so well. But there was kind of a stirring in my heart that I wanted to do something different, church-wise, than what I had experienced. I wanted to do something, fresher. The baby boomers, the Jesus revolution had just taken place in the 70s. There was a lot of influx of young people into the church. Tina and I being some of those young people that came into the church. And so some church structures were beginning to change a little bit. And so I had a real desire to do something that was a little more modern, a little different than what I had experienced growing up in church. I loved what I experienced in church. It wasn't bad. I'm not trying to say that. But I felt like there were some new things that were happening that I wanted to see. And so I had talked to my former pastor, the first pastor that I had ever worked for that had taken me in as a youth pastor and had trained me, Tommy Wilson, who was at a church here in Mesquite area. Then later I went with him to Austin, Texas, and we had a great time with him. But I had a desire, and he didn't in any way try to hold me back. I had a desire to pastor a church, and at 23, we went to Spring Hill. And then about 3 years later, I just began to have kind of a stirring. I loved Spring Hill, but it was a small town, and a lot of times people are in small towns because they want things to stay the same way. And so I was wanting to do some different things, and I felt like it would have been difficult in that environment. And so I talked to Tommy, and I said, Tommy, I'd like to plant a church. Start a church, do something. And he said, and we talked about it. And he had come and done some meetings while we were there in Louisiana. So we'd had some of these conversations before. So one night, I don't remember the night exactly, and I don't know why, because I don't normally go to bed early, but for some reason I'd gone to bed, between 9 and 10, and fallen asleep, and I thought I heard somebody talking to me. So I woke Tina up. I said, "Did you say something?" No, you didn't say anything. So I went back to sleep. A few minutes later, I felt like somebody's calling my name. So I get up, I look around the house. We lived in the parsonage, which was right behind the church. People would often come to the church. If they had a need, they would come, sometimes all hours of the night. So it was not unusual for somebody to just show up, needing to talk to somebody, wanting somebody to counsel with them, pray with them. So I went and looked outside. It wasn't anybody. And so I went back and fell back asleep pretty quick. And then a few minutes later, I heard somebody, I felt like they're calling my name. And I'm just sitting on the edge of the bed thinking, this is weird, trying to figure out what's going on. And the phone rang. And it was my friend Tommy Wilson from Austin. And he said, there's a group of people meeting in a Holiday Inn in Garland, Texas. And they're looking for a pastor, and it sounds like something you might be interested in. And so from that from that conversation, I talked with some people that had access to that congregation, that church, and then that's how we ended up at Life Community Church, which was the name of that at the time was Dallas New Life Center was the name of the church. And there was a group, when we came, there was a group of about 35 people. The church had been planted by two young men that were from Christ for the Nations, Billy Gibson and Bruce Gibson. And Billy had a real heart for evangelism. He was great at reaching people for Christ and had reached a lot of people for Christ. Most everyone who was in the church were new converts because of that. And then Bruce was great in worship and helping. They were both great, and they're still in ministry today, and they did great ministry. And the Lord just opened the opportunity, and we came here, and so there was about 35 people. We were meeting at the Holiday Inn in Garland. We didn't have any resources. We didn't have anything. We set up every week and tore down inside one of the conference rooms in the Holiday Inn. It was kind of crazy. Oftentimes they would come and move us out if they had something else, because they had 4 conference rooms, and if somebody rented the whole conference room, they would come and say to us, you don't have a place to meet today. We wouldn't know that till Sunday morning. We'd show up, wouldn't have a place to meet. And so a lot of times then they would push us into the bar, which they had a bar. And so it would be, oh gosh, you can imagine people have been smoking until 2 o'clock in the morning, and it would just reek of stale beer and smoke. And there was like no lighting. It was like this dimly lit space with it had a little place for a live band, like a 6x6 area for a live band with one light over it. And to read my Bible, I'd have to get underneath that light. So it was kind of crazy. But those were great days, and the Lord blessed us, and we were so glad. And we got what was so cool when we came to Dallas New Life Center, which became Life Community Church. They had a band, and that was unusual in 1981. I mean, there were maybe some of Chuck Smith's churches in Costa Mesa on the West Coast had bands. There weren't hardly any churches in this area that actually had a worship band that had a guitar and keyboards and drums and a bass player. And so that was part of the thing that we were so blessed. So we never had to fight the music wars that so many churches had to fight about. Are we going to sing traditional? Are we going to sing hymns? Are we going to sing? So we were able to sing, what they said back then, off the wall. We were able to sing off the wall because instead of reading out of a book like most people did, a hymn book, we were singing a lot of times new songs, because it was kind of like it was the birth of the Christian music, the Christian music movement, and so it was just cool, and what the Lord did and how that grew, and then in a few years we were able to build a building in Sunnyvale. We built our first building in Sunnyvale. We were able to move into that building in probably '83. We were in that building, so that was the beginning. It was very it was very exciting, getting to do, even then I was still just 26 when we came here, and so that was still didn't know what I was doing, and now I would say I still don't know what I'm doing. Still figuring it out, because it changes all the time. I think it's a cool story. We were in our building on I-30, which had been an old office building, and it was a pretty big building. But it had some limitations. We had a lot of classrooms because it had been an office, and it had been a call center. And then we had to take out a bunch of walls to make room for auditorium area, and we did that upstairs. It had an elevator in it, so we had an elevator. That was helpful. But, the ceiling was low. It was only like a 11, 12-foot ceiling in the auditorium area, so it's kind of a compromise. And after we'd been in there a couple of years, the building behind us was owned by the state of Texas. And the guy who directed that area, the driver's license department for the state of Texas, the guy who directed that area came one day and said, do you want to sell the building? You want to sell this building? I said, I guess we would if the price was right. We'd be open to that. So he said, well, it has to go through the legislature. The whole process has to be conformed. It'll take a while. And so, and we didn't know. A couple of years, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, but he just left it up at that. Okay, we'll begin the process and see if we can make it happen. So the way I'm wired is that I wanted to kind of know what our options were. So I started looking to see, okay, if we sell this building, where are we going to go? That's my thought in my mind. We sell this, we have to be able to go someplace. So I started looking to see what land was available and what I believed was our target area between 30 and 80, and from 635 east towards Sunnyvale, Forney. Our first building had been in Sunnyvale, and then this building was actually in Garland, and so kind of in that same vicinity. And as I was looking around and kind of began to map it out, here's what's available, this is what it's costing, I felt like the Lord said to me, stop looking. It wasn't, I haven't had a lot of what I would call where I feel like the Lord's speaking to me. It's not like every day the Lord tells me what to wear and what to do. And it wasn't audible, but it's just what I just experienced, felt in my heart, that I felt like the Lord said, just stop looking. And I said, then what will we do? What will we do? And I felt like the Lord said, this is very Abrahamic. And the Lord said, you'll go to the place I'll show you. And so I didn't look at all. And about 5 years later, the guy from the state of Texas walks into the office and says, okay, we're ready. We want to buy the land. And I was like, ooh, okay. So they made an offer. They offered us $880,000 or something, which is basically what we had paid for the building when we purchased it. And I said, I really think it's worth more than that. I said, the number that comes in my mind is 1.2 million. And he said, well, we can't pay you more than what it'll appraise for. I said, well, then, get it appraised. And because I think values have gone up in this area, I think it's worth more than when we bought it. And so they had an appraisal and they came back and it came back at 1.2. And so they bought the building. Well, then now I feel like the Lord's released me to start looking, because now we're really on a timeline. We're going to have to do something. So I start looking around, and kind of in the area here in Sunnyvale that we are now, I was looking around, and found some land that I thought was okay, but nothing really stood out, nothing that we really loved, and so there's another piece of land around the corner, and I called about that land to see if it was for sale, and the guy who was representing that land said, well, this land is not for sale. He said, but we have a piece of property that's around the corner that we think would be great for a church. He said it's got some drainage issues, it's got a pond on it, it's got some floodplain area. We think it's about 10 acres. Why don't you go look at that? So that was this land. And so we came and looked at it, and I loved it because I like trees. A lot of times in this area, it's just old pasture land. And the only trees it had on it in its heyday was just mesquite brush. And so this property had a bunch of trees on it. It had the pond. It had some texture of the land. It wasn't just flat as could be. And I liked that. And so one of the guys in the church was a surveyor, Josh DeGroat, and he and I got a survey chain, and we walked all around the perimeter, and he knew how to do all that because he's a survey guy. And we surveyed, and he said, he did the measurements. He said, I think it's closer to 14 acres. And so we went to them, and we made them an offer on the land on 14 acres for about, I think we offered them $280,000. So we offered them $20,000 an acre for the property. And what's cool about this property is that this property was still owned by the Hennard family. The Hennard family had received this piece of property from the state of Texas in 1850. So from 1850 until 2002, it had been in the same family. So in actuality, it had never been in any other name. I mean, it wasn't any name before that. It'd never been any other name. And so they had received it as part of a headship. They owned a lot of acres around here, so they still owned it. And so when we made that offer to them, they said, no, that's not enough. We want more than that. So I just said to the guy, he's a real nice guy. Then how much do you want per acre? What are you trying to get per acre? He said, we want at least $23,000 an acre. And I said, sold, and it was a cool deal. And they said yes. Part of the story that I left out. They said yes to that, so we ended up buying the property for like $320 instead of $280, and so it's a fantastic piece of property. It appraised just a few months later after that for $800,000, and so it was a tremendous blessing. It was a gift of the Lord. When one day I had Kevin Burke, one of my old youth pastors and friends that was in ministry, we came out and walked around the property. And we were praying about it. Is this the property? And we weren't walking around it like Jericho to claim it. We were just walking around it to, pray about it. Is this God's will? And we took communion together at a tree over on the other side of the property. That kind of was an interesting tree that had been struck by lightning, but it had been knocked down, and they'd even tried to cut it down, but it grew back from the root. So it's kind of a cool tree to me. It was almost like prophetic, of like a church or a group of people or a life that you've been through a lot, but the Lord still is your root and you still survive. So the Lord had been so faithful to us. And so we took communion there at that tree, and Kevin said to me, is this God's will or not? And I just said, I don't know. I want it to be. I said, it's one of those situations where I want it so bad, I can't tell if it's me or God's will. I said, so we'll just have to see how it plays out. I think it is. I hope it is. I want it to be, and so we just waited and put it in the Lord's hands, and the Lord just opened the door and allowed it to happen. And it's been a great location. We've got room to grow. We've got room to do everything that we need for a long time. So it's been such a great blessing, and the Lord's been so faithful in providing for us through the years. It's great.